Chapter 1176. Bitter feeling the location of the nightmare gate that led to the vicinity of the Black Skull was of paramount importance. Currently, no one except for Mordred was anchored to the gateway of the citadel, so that Nightmare Gate was still the only feasible way to reach it. If it was located in the wilderness of East Antarctica, the battle between the two great clans was going to happen far away from the siege capitals and the civilian population. If it was inside a city, though, think rationally. Sonny walked through the corridors of the fortress as he analyzed the situation. If the Nightmare Gate was located inside a siege capital, then there wasn't much he could do. The lives of countless civilians would be put in mortal danger, or maybe even snuffed out directly. The best Sonny could manage was to try mitigating the damage somehow. If it was somewhere in the wilderness, however, then he did not have to do anything. His problems would just solve themselves. Valor and Song were welcome to slaughter each other as much as they wanted. Wrong. Thinking that way was short-sighted. Sure, the great clans were a bunch of hateful jerks, but they were also responsible for defending a vast portion of East Antarctica, albeit simply to keep up appearances. Their power was especially important when dealing with high-value targets like Titans, since 6 out of the 7 saints present on the continent belonged to the domains. What would happen if all of them just went and killed each other? Nothing good. Countless refugees had already been evacuated, but millions more remained. If only the evacuation army had been given a few more months, enough for the Legion of Sleepers to undergo awakening, things would have been different. But Mordred, the damned lunatic, had made that impossible, so the power of the great clans was still too important. Sonny felt sick to his stomach. He was deeply unhappy about the fact that, while the great clans were odious, they were also needed. They were like a necessary evil. Thinking that way made him feel dirty. It felt like he was making compromises. Was that how Wake of Ruin and the rest of the government felt? Forget about it, so what the hell do I do? It seemed that, thanks to Mordred, a bloody and destructive all-out battle between the forces of Valor and Song was now both close and inevitable. They could entirely obliterate each other, which would be the worst outcome, since there would be no one left to continue defending the refugees from the myriads of nightmare creatures roaming the continent. Therefore, there was only one way for him to achieve the best outcome. If there was no way to prevent the battle, he had to do everything in his power to help one side achieve victory, and not any kind of victory at that. A Pyrrhic one would be no different from mutual destruction. Only an overwhelming victory would minimize the losses of one of the sides, thus leaving enough fighters alive to make a difference in the evacuation effort. Wait. Sonny suddenly froze, growing even more pale than usual. His eyes widened. His hands trembled. Then, slowly, a smile that seemed more than a little mad appeared on his face. Through the shadow that was hiding in the sealed strategy room, he looked at someone who stood there, silently listening to what Morgan was saying. A young woman with silver hair and cold gray eyes, clad in an intricate armor of black steel. He looked at Nephi's. Sonny slowly exhaled. Was that what you meant? Was it not exactly what she had told him a lifetime ago, during the opulent ball of the great clan Valor? That he would follow her not because she had ordered him to, but because he wanted to with a smile on his face. That their fates were intertwined. On that day, Sonny had rejected Nephi's and refused to follow her into the embrace of Clan Valor. Instead, he enlisted in the first evacuation army and left for Antarctica. So much had happened since then. And yet, here he was, planning to fight side by side with her under the banner of the great clan Valor, helping them in their sinful war against the great clan Song. Entirely of his own accord. Sonny reached with one hand and touched his neck, as if checking to see if there was a slave collar on it. What is this bitter feeling? A hollow laugh escaped from his lips. After a few moments, Sonny shook his head and continued on his way. It doesn't matter anyway. Sure, he felt bitterly reluctant to prove Neff right, but wouldn't it be pathetically childish to throw a tantrum and change his decision just because his pride was hurt? Since when did he have pride anyway? Whether he liked it or not, making sure that as many civilians as possible survived the chain of nightmares was indeed what he wished for. So if Sonny had to help Clan Valor battle Clan Song to achieve that goal, that was what he would do. There was the possibility of helping Song defeat Valor instead, too. As far as he was concerned, one was just as vile as the other, so it made no difference to Sonny which side he would end up supporting. However, he was already integrated into the Valor force to some extent, which was convenient. Nephi's, Cassie, and the Firekeepers were also here, so going to the other side meant potentially causing their deaths. Directly or indirectly, that was not something Sonny wanted or was willing to do. Which meant that he was stuck with Valor. Of course, it was highly questionable if his involvement would even make a difference, but he had to at least try. He had to try his best. Sonny moved through the port fortress, which was slowly becoming filled with noise. There was a strange smile on his face. Ain't it funny? He was suddenly sad that the sin of solace was not there to appreciate the joke. The drums of war were booming all across Antarctica. Well, nothing that noticeable was happening, really. The great clans were mobilizing forces with a silent efficiency that was both subtle and frightening. If one did not know what to look for, they would remain blissfully unaware of the fact that the whole continent would be soon shaken by the fallout of a historic battle. Sonny, however, knew. In the port fortress, the thunder of the cannonade had grown silent. The horde of nightmare creatures had been dealt with, and the tired soldiers were descending from the walls. Instead of going to rest, however, they were quietly listening to new orders and starting to prepare for an immediate departure. The mundane soldiers were checking their equipment with calm, businesslike expressions. The awakened, who would usually not dismiss their enchanted armor in the field, strangely wore simple uniforms. Knowing how dire the near future promised to be, they wanted to give all their memories a chance to be fully repaired. The administrative personnel were frantically working to rearrange logistical chains and prepare the force for a sudden expedition. There were many signs like that. They were especially apparent when one compared the behavior of the Valor soldiers with that of the evacuation army staff. The latter were tiredly celebrating the victory, while the former seemed more focused than when they had been battling the abominations. The Nightmare Gate does not seem to be located inside of a siege capital. Sonny found a calm and dark corner within the keep of the fortress and leaned on the wall. He had managed to determine the nature of the area where the entrance to the Black Skull Citadel was located by spying on the Valor administrative staff. Any large-scale movement of military forces involved a certain amount of logistical work, and one could infer many things from these preparations. From the looks of it, Clan Valor was preparing to venture into the wilderness of East Antarctica. The distance they had to traverse also didn't seem to be small, so that put some of Sonny's worries to rest. Still, there was a lot to consider. Sonny knew what the great clans would do, and what he himself had to do. However, what would the government's response be? As someone with the title of a special government envoy, he should be receiving a call soon. And indeed, not a few minutes later, his communicator lit up because of an incoming transmission. Sonny summoned the Bone Singer, enveloped his surroundings in silence, and answered. The sharp face of Saint Kor appeared on the holographic screen, soon joined by the pleasant visage of Soul Reaper Jet. The gaunt transcendent spoke first. I'll assume that both of you are already familiar with the situation. What I want to know is what caused this mess. His grating voice sounded calm, but Sunny could feel the angry and tense undertone in it. He briefly glanced at the projection of Jet, then answered, "I think I can provide an explanation." Both of them paid rapt attention to his words. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then spoke, choosing his words carefully. "It appears that a citadel was discovered in the Nightmare Desert. Clan Valor was the first to find it, but their attempt at capture failed. Now, both clans have an equal chance to come into possession of a crucial advantage. A direct confrontation for access to the Nightmare Gate leading to the Citadel seems inevitable." He paused and then added evenly, "They are going all out." As St. Cor's face darkened, Jet nodded. "I can confirm." Sunny did not know what the veteran saint was thinking about, but he felt chills even through the holographic projection. Even though Wake of Ruin's expression did not change much, it felt as though the world itself subtly changed instead, reacting to his wrath, discontent, contempt. Dejection, maybe. The old man grimaced. What immaculate timing. At least he could still be sarcastic. Sunny had to imagine that the two great clans suddenly shifting to active warfare was like a disaster for the government. St. Cor would have to completely rearrange the disposition of the evacuation army and come up with a new strategy. Even then, it might not be enough. Then again, Army Command had to have been prepared for something like this, even if it was the worst-case scenario for them. They were no fools. After a long pause, Wake of Ruin shook his head, then looked at Sunny and Jet again. "Valor and Song might be arrogant, but they are not unreasonable. This bloodshed can still be prevented, maybe. Similar things have happened before. A large-scale battle can be avoided if they agree to hold a duel between two champions instead." Sunny couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. He didn't doubt the wisdom and experience of the seasoned transcendent, but he also didn't believe that the great clans would step down, especially not because of something as quaint as an honor duel. They were like sharks that smelled blood in the water. Those from Valor were, at least. They had been holding back their bloodlust for too long already. Still, was there really a chance that a strange duel between two powerful warriors could replace a wasteful battle? It seemed improbable, but then again, legacies were often weird about such things. St. Cor let out a heavy sigh and then added, "The problem this time is that both sides seem to be certain that they will win if the battle actually happens, so they have no reason to seek an alternative. Additionally, they have been acting slightly erratic as of late. It is hard to say what will actually happen." Seemingly coming to a decision, the gaunt transcended nodded and threw a piercing gaze at Sunny and Jet. "The two of you will remain with the emissaries and follow them to that Nightmare Gate. Gather as much information as you can. While you're at it, I will arrive personally and try to mediate an acceptable resolution." Jet remained silent for a moment. "Understood, sir." However, Sunny was not as agreeable. "What if you can't?" His irreverent question, or maybe the fact that he even dared to ask a question, seemed to surprise the old saint. Wake of Ruin stared at him darkly. After a brief pause, he said simply, "Then we withdraw and try to salvage the aftermath." With that, he terminated the call. The gaunt face of the government saint disappeared, leaving Sunny and Jet alone. Soul Reaper looked at him and smiled. How can she even smile in this situation? "Oh my, I know that look. You're thinking about doing something crazy, aren't you?" Sunny glanced at her darkly and shrugged. "I don't even know what is crazy anymore." Jet chuckled. "That is not a good sign at all." He studied her face somberly, then said quietly, "If Wake of Ruin fails in his negotiation, Valor and Song will really clash. At that point, the best move would be to support one side against the other, in order to preserve as many fighters as possible. Are you ready to make that decision?" Soul Reaper's smile grew bleak. "The government can't break its neutrality. Even if it's beneficial at the moment, the consequences would be catastrophic in the long run. Sunny simply stared at her. I am not asking about the government. I am asking about you. There were times when people could not escape making tough choices. Sunny had long made his, and Jet would have to follow suit, whether she wanted to or not. Of course, doing nothing was also a choice. However, she had always positioned herself as a cog in the government machine, but maybe it was time for Soul Reaper to think for herself. Sunny hoped that she would, at least. Jet lingered for a while before answering. Eventually, she said, "Let's see how it goes." Then her face disappeared. The screen of the communicator switched off, leaving Sunny in the darkness. He sighed and dismissed the Bone Singer, then left his temporary shelter. An all-out battle, or a duel of two champions. I wonder which one will end up happening. He hoped for the best, but had to prepare for the worst. Although both clans were assembling their armies with urgent haste, it was not an easy thing to move a military force across East Antarctica. The wilderness was infested with countless abominations, and nightmare gates were everywhere, making every route slow and dangerous. Clan Valor was in a slightly better position because they had coincidentally pulled most of their forces together prior to Mordred's revelation, in order to destroy a migrating horde of nightmare creatures. Still, there were many warriors and assets that had been left behind in the siege capitals, who now had to join the main body of the great clan's contingent. There was Saint Tyrus, for example. The fact that Dire Fang had been able to join Silent Stalker in ambushing Whispering Blade proved that she alone was not enough to contain the enemy Transcendent, so there was no point in keeping her in a distant government siege capital. So, Sky Tide had been recalled and was en route to join the war party. There were other squires and even knights that had to be summoned, as well. So for the first few days, progress had been slow. Most of the mundane personnel had been left behind, and now only the awakened were following Morgan toward the fateful Nightmare Gate. Nevertheless, their number was too great to pass unnoticed, and so skirmishes with nightmare creatures happened almost every hour. Many of these skirmishes threatened to grow into something more serious if not resolved swiftly. In these cases, either Morgan's echoes or one of the saints joined the melee to prevent the small-scale confrontations from becoming dire battles. Sunny was not required to participate in them, of course. Actually, he found himself in a somewhat awkward situation. No one had really invited him to join the expedition, and his status was more vague than ever. Officially, he was the government's envoy whose duties concerned the cooperation between Clan Valor and the evacuation army. However, the Great Clan had more or less abandoned the pretense of being in the southern quadrant to help, and was acting against the government's interests. So what was an envoy supposed to do in that situation, exactly? Why was he even needed? Sunny did not have a good explanation, but luckily, no one asked. Whether it was because the warriors of valor couldn't be bothered or simply did not care, he did not know. In any case, they mostly left him alone. In fact, Sunny was basically ignored. Even Morgan seemed to have forgotten about his existence, which was not too surprising. She had much bigger issues to worry about than the whereabouts of a neutral government ascended. So Sunny simply stayed in one of the APCs assigned to the Firekeepers. The Firekeepers themselves were gone, though most of them had already entered the seeds, so he had the vehicle all to himself. Nephi's and Cassie would appear from time to catch a few hours of sleep, but other than that, he remained alone. That gave him a lot of time to think. Sitting in the pilot's seat and driving the APC across the hellish remains of Antarctica, which looked much more like a piece of the dream realm now than that of the waking world, he somberly considered the past. It was funny, really. Sunny had come to Antarctica to pursue his personal goals, not caring much about anything else. But now, he somehow ended up caring about the mission of the evacuation army enough to disregard his personal interests. He used to mock selfless people, but now he was ready to do something selfless at a great cost to himself. Was it like that? No, not really. In the end, everything Sonny did was for himself. He was not trying to protect the refugees because it was the right thing to do or out of some kind of moral obligation. He was doing it simply because he wanted to. That was his desire. He was just trying to fulfill his own desires. Sonny had wanted to survive at all costs once. But then it was not enough anymore. He had wanted to be strong once, but now it was not enough anymore either. He had strength, but what was the point of having strength if he couldn't achieve what he wanted with it? What Sonny really wanted now was to use his strength to shape the world in a way that suited his wishes, shaping reality with strength. That was power. So was he lusting for power now? Controlling the APC, Sonny frowned. Then what about freedom? That had been his real goal all along, after all. Coming to Antarctica was a means to achieve that goal, but instead, he found himself bound to more people, more places, more things. He was more restricted now than he had ever been. Before, what had restricted him were circumstances beyond his control. Now, he was bound by his own desires. On second thought, it's not that funny. Sonny now understood better than ever why the demon of desire had been one of the most powerful among the demons, second to none, except for Weaver. But was it really a bad thing? So what if he was compelled by the things he wanted? So what if he was bound to people, ideas, and values? Maybe it was not a bad thing, after all, simply because he had chosen these bonds himself. Sonny understood that, and yet, a small part of him rebelled against such thoughts. That part still wanted to be unrestrained and not beholden to anything. To be free. That part had to take a backseat for now, though. Because he had to finish what he had started. Even if it was futile, Sonny had to do his best to see the evacuation of the citizens of Antarctica through. After that, well, he would see what else there was to do. His dreams seemed more distant than ever, but strangely enough, Sonny found himself calm and determined. His mind was set. Maybe that was the true conviction. The thought made him uncomfortable. The war party had stopped and made camp. Sonny's APC was parked within the defensive perimeter, and he was calmly preparing supper. It seemed strange to be doing something so mundane on the verge of an event that had the potential to alter the course of history, but he was hungry. Hunger was much more powerful than the forces that shaped history. I miss the Rhino. The armored vehicle that the fire keepers had used was by no means cheap, but its amenities were rather bare bones. There was not even an integrated kitchen, just a few devices for food storage and preparation. Still, he was good at improvising. As Sonny cooked, he mentally went over what he had gained since coming to Antarctica, and what he could use if the worst happened, and the two great clans clashed in a bloody battle. Sonny had been a master for many months before the Chain of Nightmares, but he felt that he only came into his ascended powers here. His mastery of shadow manifestation had improved tremendously, both in terms of impact and versatility. He also developed Shadow Shell and Shadow Incarnation, as well as their combination. Both of these abilities were extremely powerful. His practical knowledge of sorcery had grown as well. He was now able to copy more complex enchantments and do it faster. He could even modify them to a degree. Even though the realities of the Antarctica campaign had prevented Sonny from spending a lot of time on weaving, his repertoire was much broader than before. There were new powerful memories in his arsenal, including transcendent ones. The Sin of Solace, the Shroud of Graceless Dusk, and others. There was the Mirror of Truth, too. Chances were he would have to use it soon. In terms of raw power, Sonny was now a tyrant. He had 5 cores and 5 shadows, which increased both his physical prowess and essence capacity. Strangely enough, even his essence control had undergone a noticeable improvement. Unable to rely on the soul serpent in the dire conditions of the southern quadrant, Sonny had been forced to elevate this aspect of his power to an almost flawless efficiency. Then there were his shadows. He had gained a new one, the ravenous fiend. Now that Imp had feasted on the remains of the Sun Prince, the scrawny goblin was strong enough to be sent into battle. Nightmare was close to both ascension and unlocking his terror ability. Saint had risen both in class and rank, becoming a transcendent devil. That alone was an incredible leap for him, but the sublimation of the mantle of the underworld was perhaps no less important. His new attribute, the marble shell, improved his resilience and combat performance to a remarkable degree. Honestly, having it was almost like possessing a secondary aspect. Considering all that, it was hard to deny that the present Sonny was incomparably more powerful than his past self from before Antarctica. The comparison was not even funny. That past Sonny was nothing more than a feeble brat. Ironically, Sonny had come to the southern quadrant in search of strength, and although he stopped caring about that goal a long time ago, he ended up achieving it nevertheless. Despite it all, though, he felt that there were much more valuable things he had gained here. Things that went far beyond shadows, memories, and attributes. The experience he had gained, the skills he had honed, the lessons he had learned, those were what truly separated him from his past self. Those were what made him truly stronger. From the darkness of the polar night and the desperation of the Antarctic center to the cold expanse of East Antarctica and its many dangers, Sonny had grown and matured. He had gone through countless battles and achieved many improbable victories. There had been harrowing defeats, too. Those had taught him as well. Preparing utensils for 3 people, Sonny looked into the distance and sighed. He would be turning 21 in about a month. There had been a time when he was not even sure that he would make it that far, but now, here he was. I don't really feel young anymore. Maybe someone like Wake of Ruin would laugh at these words, but Sonny truly felt that way. He had never really gotten a chance to be a child, and now, he was not a youth anymore either. Am I old then? As Sonny was pondering the vicissitudes of life, the hatch of the APC opened and Nephi's came in, soon followed by Cassie. The two had been spending the last few days in endless strategy meetings, so both looked exhausted. The smell of freshly cooked food made both of them relax. Noticing the distant expression on Sonny's face, Nephi's tilted her head a little and asked, "What are you thinking about so seriously?" He flinched, then shook his head and continued setting the table. Nothing serious. I was just thinking that I'm too old for this crap." She frowned, then pierced him with a cold gaze. "I'm older than you, though." Her meaning was clear. "Are you calling me old?" Sonny grinned. Yes, yes, forget I said anything. Come, Nuna, let's eat. Who knows when we'll get a chance to enjoy a proper meal again." The two gave him strange looks and sat around the small fold-out table, looking down at the dishes he prepared. Well, really, there was just one dish, the everything potslip that Professor Obel had taught him how to make. Sonny sat down, too, and put a generous serving on his plate. "But honestly, you're not even a full year older than me, while Cassie is not a full year younger than me. So, let's speak comfortably." He put a spoonful of the weird slop into his mouth, then smiled at them. Cassie hesitated and cautiously nudged the slop with a spoon. "What even is that?" Sonny grinned. I am glad that you asked. This is an ancient dish that has been passed down from person to person since the dark times. As I was told, it was initially inspired by corpse meat. They ate in comfortable silence. Sonny knew that both Nephi's and Cassie were tired and only had a little time to rest before Morgan would need them again, so he did not waste that time with idle conversations. It was not like he had a lot to say anyway. Still, there was one question that he had to ask. Pushing the plate away, Sonny glanced at Nephi's and lingered for a moment. I was told that there might be some kind of duel instead of a battle. Do you think it's possible? She did not hurry with an answer. Neff cradled a cup of tea in her hands as she stared into the amber liquid. Eventually, she said, I don't know. It is a kind of tradition. The legacy clans would not have survived if they resolved every conflict by spilling rivers of blood. There are actually not that many of us after all. However, neither valor nor song are acting the way they used to, so it's hard to tell. Sonny remained silent for a few moments, thinking about who the champions were going to be if the duel really happened. Would the great clans send saints to fight each other, or masters? Would Morgan and Mordred cross swords and spill each other's blood? Or would Morgan send Nephis to fight in her stead? He just did not know. Shifting slightly, Sonny looked at Neph and asked, what if the battle actually happens? Do you think that valor can win? Up until now, it seemed like Clan Song was confidently pulling ahead. However, he doubted that their enemy would be easily defeated. This time, Nephis did not hesitate at all. Yes. He studied her motionless face with curiosity. Where did that confidence come from? Why? Sonny expected Neph to say something in her usual style, like, because I am with them, or because that is my will. However, she simply shook her head and said in a slightly subdued tone, because they are of war. He blinked. Indeed, she was right. Clan Valor was the clan that had inherited the lineage of War God, the deity of warfare, life, progress, technology, craft, and intellect, as well as the patron goddess of humanity. It was not a coincidence that they were exalted fighters, masters of forging memories, and the most influential clan among both the awakened and mundane humans. They would also be the paragons of warfare. It did not matter if Clan Song had managed to achieve slight superiority at the earlier stages of the conflict. All that mattered was who would get the last laugh, and Sonny had no doubt that Morgan had many diabolical schemes stored in that pretty head of hers. However, there was a slight wrinkle in that theory. He leaned back. That is true, but you forget one thing: Mordred is also a descendant of war. He shared the same blood, and he is with Song. Nephis frowned. It seemed that she indeed had not put too much weight into Mordred's presence in Antarctica. Really, she couldn't be blamed. Although Sonny and Cassie had told her about their experiences in the Night Temple and the Kingdom of Hope, she had not lived through those trials herself. She had not experienced the suffocating horror of being locked in a citadel with that monster, watching as the number of his victims grew while the number of survivors dwindled. Eventually, Nephis shrugged. It doesn't really matter, does it? Sonny stared at her with a dark expression. I think it does. Why wouldn't it? Neph sighed. What do I care if valor wins or loses? I just need to survive. If they win and I help them, my status within the clan will grow. If they lose and I survive, it will grow even more, simply because there will be fewer powerful warriors for the clan to lean on. In their absence, my importance will grow. Either way, many members of both Valor and Song will die. As she spoke the last words, white sparks ignited in her eyes. Suddenly, the interior of the APC seemed to be filled with incinerating heat. Nephis had been acting strangely placid for a long time, so Sonny almost forgot how frightening her murderous obsession was. He looked at her, surprised by that cold logic. Well, she was right in a way, but it matters to me, though. Nephis blinked a couple of times, startled, then looked at him in confusion. Why? Sonny frowned. Because these people that are going to die are supposed to be protecting the refugees from the hordes of nightmare creatures. Who is going to do that if the bastards all kill each other? Neph seemed as if she didn't know what to say. She remained silent for a long time, then sighed. I wouldn't put my faith in the great clans. Doing so will only lead to ruin." Sonny chuckled, thinking how funny that sounded coming from her. Shaking his head, he then looked at Cassie, who had been silent until now. "What about you? What do you think? Any helpful visions of the future?" Cassie smiled weakly. "No, no helpful visions." She touched her hair and then suddenly said, "Oh, but I think that you should check on Rain." Sonny flinched, his eyes widened. "Why, have you seen something?" Cassie tilted her head, then paled slightly and looked away in embarrassment. "Ah, I'm sorry. I worded that poorly, I think. No, I haven't seen anything. It's just that we are going to venture deep into the wilderness, and who knows what will happen next. Chances are, we're not going to have access to the network for a while, so you mentioned that you're exchanging messages and she might get worried." Sonny stared at the blind girl for a few moments, flabbergasted. Standing up, he picked up the plates and walked away to clean them. "Gods, think before you speak next time, all right? You almost gave me a heart attack, damn it. Go to sleep, you two." Nephi's and Cassie climbed into the sleeping niches while he washed the dishes. Once that was done, Sonny threw an irritated look at the niche where the blind girl was sleeping and grimaced. "She is right, though. I might not be able to send a message to Rain for a while." Settling in the pilot's chair, he took out his communicator and checked his messages. To his relief, Rain was perfectly fine. She was going to school, training, and showing zero symptoms of being infected by the nightmare spell. Soul Serpent was with her as well, so Sonny allowed himself to calm down. He stared at the screen of the communicator for a while, then sighed and started typing. "Yeah, I'm doing well. Naturally. Remember that promotion I wrote about? Well, I am a glorified pencil pusher now. Most of my duties have to do with confirming requisition requests and forwarding letters. Honestly, it's driving me crazy. Scouting the wild expanses of the southern quadrant alone was much more fun. Anyway, I've been thinking about this and that recently, like what I want to do with my life and how I'm not that young anymore. Stupid stuff like that. So, this is what I was thinking about." As he typed the long message, the cold sun slowly moved across the sky outside the APC, never falling behind the horizon. The day never seemed to end, but time was flowing by. Soon, the forces of two great clans were going to meet in the wilderness of East Antarctica. The outcome of their ill-fated clash could very well decide the fate of the dying continent. Sonny climbed to the roof of the APC and looked at the ravaged plain of East Antarctica, which stretched in all directions as far as the eye could see. He could have sent his shadows instead, but on a day like today, Sonny wanted to see it all with his own eyes. The ground was gray and the stormy sky was gray, too. The ribbons of shallow brooks and the distant lakes were dark, resembling lead. The world seemed to have grown deathly silent, like a predator preparing to lunge at its prey. The air was brimming with suffocating tension. In front of him, at some distance, an abandoned outpost could be seen, tilted and with its alloy walls ripped open. There was an ugly black rift of a nightmare gate shimmering with darkness in front of the desolate fortress, and near it, indifferent to the maddening whispers of the call, a small figure could be seen, sitting on the ground. It was hard to tell anything about the figure from that distance, except for the fact that it was a human. Surrounding the outpost from three directions, three armies were preparing to advance. The great clan Valor, the great clan Song, and the hastily assembled government force that was supposed to mediate a compromise, through effort and a bit of luck or misfortune, depending on how one looked at it. All of them had reached the Nightmare Gate on the same day. Then again, maybe it was part of some insane calculation. The gate was situated at the very border between the territories of the two clans, and at that point, Sonny wouldn't be surprised by anything. He was still with the war party of Clan Valor. The awakened warriors had already disembarked from the transports and were now silently assembling into a battle formation. Those that would be fighting on foot were positioned at the center, and those that rode echo mounts were assembled at the flanks. 5 people stood in front of the loose phalanx: Morgan, Madoc, Nephi's, St. Tyrus, and the Summer Knight. Opposite them was a much larger force. Sonny could not really see, but he knew that Beastmaster, Silent Stalker, Dire Fang, and Sation were leading it. Behind them were the awakened warriors of song, and surrounding the awakened was a sea of enthralled nightmare creatures. Countless thralls were standing motionlessly, as if frozen in place. It was eerie and deeply disturbing to see the abominable monsters acting so subdued and obedient. The government force was by far the smallest of the 3, numbering just 100 awakened or so. Even though they were too far away to make out details, Sonny felt an overpowering sense of unease radiating from their small formation. Well, they were right to feel scared. Not only could the plain soon become a battlefield, but the abandoned outpost and the nightmare gate in front of it were deep within the hunting grounds of a corrupted titan. The creature was nowhere in sight for now, but there was no guarantee that it would not arrive soon, attracted by the smell of human souls and spilled blood. What a disaster! Sonny was full of hatred toward the great clans. His contempt was justly earned, too. He had personally killed many members of Song and Valor, be it through sabotage or with his own hands, and yet he was not happy to see them preparing to slaughter each other. He was not sad either, just resigned. In any case, there was no place for useless emotions right now. Sonny had to steel himself and prepare to do what was needed. Neither army seemed to be moving. The wind was picking up, and the lonely figure in front of the nightmare gate remained motionless, as if inviting them to approach. After a while, several people separated from the formation of the government, awakened and walked forward. As if it were a signal, Morgan took a step forward. The rest of the Valor leaders followed her, and after hesitating for a bit, Sonny jumped down from the APC and hurried to join them. As he left the formation, he glanced at Cassie, who had stayed back and was flanked by 2 Knights of Valor. The blind girl seemed calm, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. Leaving her behind, Sonny caught up with Morgan and the rest. Nephi's and Tyrus looked at him with inscrutable expressions, but the princess herself seemed amused by his decision to involve himself in the negotiation. "Master Sunless, how nice of you to join us." He glanced at her darkly and shrugged. "Well, my boss is over there. What else am I supposed to do?" Morgan chuckled, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she and all her people could very well die today. In fact, she looked almost excited. "Indeed. And what does a government agent like yourself think about the situation?" Sonny frowned. "First of all, I am not a government agent. I just volunteered my services to the evacuation army for the duration of the Antarctica campaign. Secondly, I think that all of you have lost your minds." Sonny had a lot of thoughts about what was happening, but it all boiled down to the fact that he still did not clearly understand the motives of the great clans. From his point of view, this whole despicable war was pure lunacy, which meant a lot coming from him. Even if Sonny considered the desire of the sovereigns to expand their domains, many things still didn't make any sense. The timing of the conflict, the wasteful strategies, the excessive urgency of their actions, neither Valor nor Song were behaving normally. They were not fools, so there had to be something wrong with their heads, surely. Morgan smiled. "Lost our minds? Ah, I see. I guess it would indeed look like that from the sidelines." Her smile disappeared, replaced by cold ruthlessness. "However, I can assure you, it is the world that has gone mad, not us." After that strange remark, there was no more time to talk. The nightmare gate drew nearer, and finally, Sonny could see who was waiting calmly in its shadow. It was a slender young man clad in a suit of dark armor, with pale skin and raven-black hair. His face was sharp and thin, not exactly handsome, but at the same time charming and strangely beautiful. His most striking feature, though, were his eyes, which didn't seem to possess a color of their own, and instead reflected the world back on itself like two pools of liquid silver. Mordred had been crouching on the ground, his expression calm and reserved. Noticing the approaching emissaries, he slowly rose and looked at them with cold intensity. Sonny expected a familiar grin to appear on the lips of the Prince of Nothing, but instead, Mordred remained strangely impassive. Then finally, a corner of his mouth bent upward in a dark, joyless smile. "You've finally arrived. You've finally arrived." Three groups of people stared at Mordred with different expressions. First were the emissaries of valor. Morgan and Maddock kept their emotions in check, while Sky Tide and Summer Night seemed grim. Nephise was her usual indifferent self, but there was a hint of curiosity hidden in the depths of her calm gray eyes. The emissaries of song were less reserved. Beastmaster was looking at Mordred with barely contained anger, as so were Dire Fang and Silent Stalker. The first was just as he had been, somber and savage-looking, while the latter was an unassuming and elegant woman in black leather armor. Her beautiful face was inexpressive, but there was deep contempt in her strange feline eyes. Sation was the calmest of them. She wasn't even looking at Mordred, instead studying the faces of the champions of valor. Jet was standing behind her quietly. Lastly, there were the representatives of the government. Sonny shifted uncomfortably. What the hell are they doing here? St. Cor was, of course, leading the small delegation, but there were two familiar figures behind him. Kai and Effie had somehow ended up as the escorts of the government transcendent, and were now looking at the Prince of Nothing darkly. They had never met Mordred, but the echoes of his actions had impacted them, both before the second nightmare and within it. There were a couple more government masters with Wake of Ruins as well, but Sonny did not know them. Why did he have to bring those two here? Sonny frowned, then silently separated from the Valor emissaries and went a stand behind St. Cor, shoulder to shoulder with Kai. Jet did the same, taking a place beside Effie. In the silence that followed, Mordred's words hung in the cold air. The Prince of Nothing lingered for a few moments, and then looked at Morgan with those strange, mirror-like eyes. "My sister." Sonny had long noticed that Morgan never used the word brother when speaking about Mordred. In fact, when the reflection addressed her as sister, she seemed to have been enraged. He expected a similar reaction this time too, but instead, Morgan smiled coldly. "I have to say, I am impressed. I never imagined that you would dare to face me with your actual body. I've always regretted that I wasn't there to cut it the last time." Mordred looked down at himself, then raised his head and stared at his younger sister. "Oh, this thing. Yes, it is a bit reckless of me to use it, isn't it? But then again, it's not every day that I get to meet my family. I thought that if I was going to kill you, I should do it with my own two hands." Sonny tilted his head, a little suddenly distracted. Come to think of it, how did Mordred's own body end up here? His original one had been destroyed by Clan Valor, but the spell had to have created a new one for him after the second nightmare. Nevertheless, it would have been incredibly hard for the Prince of Nothing to arrive in Antarctica unnoticed while wearing his own face. Taking the body of someone like Ascended Bast would have been both easier and smarter. Unless, assuming that Mordred's body could survive while his soul was wandering someplace else, he could have just stored it somewhere and then retrieved it at the right moment. He could have even carried it with him using a special memory, or maybe an unknown facet of his power. Suddenly, Sonny felt a cold chill running down his spine. Did Mordred have a collection of human bodies he carried around in some strange mirror dimension, like a macabre wardrobe of flesh? That sounded exactly like something the madman would do. As he was thinking, Beastmaster suddenly spoke, her voice so friendly that it actually sounded terrifying. I am very sorry to interrupt this touching family reunion, but, at the risk of sounding petty, could I maybe receive some explanations? Prince Mordred, if I may, why couldn't you just follow the damned plan? Don't tell me that you've been secretly working for your father this whole time. That would be such a disappointment. Mordred remained silent for a moment, then glanced at the alluring saint with a somber expression. It is nothing like that. Please accept my sincere apologies. During the battle to conquer Black Skull, the warriors of valor became suspicious of my identity, so I had no choice but to act. Beastmaster studied his face with doubt. It seemed that she was not convinced by that rather logical explanation. However, it was not like anyone could disprove Mordred's words, and in fact, he had no reasonable motive to lie or sabotage their plans. Doing so would have been madness. Mordred sighed. I understand why you might be angry and distrustful, my lady, but please believe me, my intention is and always has been to help your mother achieve victory over clan valor. My family has to pay for what they've done to me. There's no one, who wants to see them fall more than me. I would have followed the plan if there was the smallest chance of success. But now, well, all I could do is offer you my blade. He turned to face Morgan and snarled. And use it to cut them down. Mordred's voice sounded flawlessly impassioned and sincere. It was so compelling, actually, that Sonny almost believed him. Of course, he knew better than to trust a single word coming out of the lying bastard's mouth. Morgan scoffed. Your blade, what can you even do with a blade? She unsheathed her own sword and leaned on it, smiling. Come on, show me. There was something very strange about that sword. Sonny had never seen it before, and he suddenly felt chills when looking at the austere double-edged blade. Mordred stared at the sword as well, his expression growing bleak. After a few moments, he said quietly, I guess he is watching then. Then his lips suddenly twisted into a dark grin. Well, in that case, let's give him a good show. With that, the air around him suddenly rippled, and 6 mirror shards became visible, hovering above the ground. Sonny's eyes narrowed. Reflections transcendent all of them. Then the mirror shards suddenly glinted, transforming into human figures. Nephis finally showed a reaction. White flames ignited in her eyes. There, surrounding Mordred, now stood 6 people. As he smiled, the reflections of Whispering Blade, Summer Night, Sky Tide, Beastmaster, Silent Stalker, and Dire Fang smiled with him. 6 reflections, 6 transcendent beasts, all assuming the shape of the saints of the great clans. Sonny felt cold as he looked at the smiling faces of the simulacrums. And Mordred's face. The rest of the emissaries seemed just as shaken as he was, even if some managed to hide their emotions better than others. The representatives of valor were, understandably, grim. Even Morgan's composure cracked for a split second, revealing a hint of weakness. Saint Cor's pale face grew even more ashen. But even the saints of song appeared startled by Mordred's unexpected show of power. It seemed that they did not know the extent of his abilities as well as they had thought they did. For a few long moments there was nothing but chilling silence. Then Morgan spat, her voice full of contempt. Am I supposed to be impressed? What a neat trick, bravo. Mordred's smile only widened. It was at that moment that Wake of Ruin finally took a step forward and spoke. Enough, what madness is this? The emissaries of the 2 clans looked at him with unfriendly expressions. Mordred did, too, and the 6 reflections turned their heads in perfect synchronicity. The sight of them acting that way was deeply disturbing, especially since the mirror creatures wore familiar, smiling faces. Wake of Ruin scowled, and the subtle scent of slaughter that always followed him intensified. I won't pretend to have authority over your actions, awakened of song and valor, but I am your elder. No matter what benefits you hope to receive from this battle, I know that your losses will be much greater. You know it too. This world of ours has withstood 5 decades of the nightmare spell, and your families rose from that chaos. The reason they have endured while countless others were destroyed is not strength. There were others who possessed strength, but foresight and restraint. So, lower your swords. His grating voice echoes above the plain, making the mighty saints of the great clans listen. Even Madoc, the oldest and most powerful among them, seemed to have some respect for Saint Cor, who came from the first generation. Still, Whispering Blade was not someone who lowered his head. This conflict won't be decided with words, Wake of Ruin. Too much is at stake. Saint Cor gritted his teeth. Ah yes, the rulers will it, so blood must be spilled. However, you are not barbarians. You are the legacy clans, so act like it. Don't you have traditions and protocols for just these kinds of situations? The honorable duel to death if need be. Why waste the lives of your kin and soldiers when the quarrel can be resolved by 2 champions? He glared darkly at Madoc and Beastmaster, and then said, Or are you not certain of your strength? His words seemed to have an effect. Sonny held his breath, not even daring to think whether a peaceful, comparatively, resolution was really possible. One person dying was infinitely better than numerous awakened warriors slaughtering each other. So many problems would go away if the damned great clans agreed with the proposal of Saint Cor. He was old and wise, after all. He had seen and survived more than any of them. He must have seen a fair share of such duels as well. If only Morgan and Beastmaster were able to swallow their pride and agree to a compromise. However, Sonny just could not see Morgan backing off after being provoked by her brother. She had been waiting for an opportunity to make Song bleed for too long. Damnation! But to his surprise, after a long stretch of silence, Morgan slightly lowered her head and uttered through clenched teeth, A duel is acceptable. We'll relinquish our claim on the Black Skull if we lose. And her vermilion eyes blazed with rage. I'll act as the champion of valor myself. Who dares to face me? Madoc's eyes widened slightly, and he abruptly turned to her. Morgan! The princess just smiled coldly. It's all right, uncle, say no more. Sonny was somewhat shocked, but also cautiously excited. Furtively glancing to the side, he noticed a somber expression on Jet's face. Unlike him, she was not looking at Morgan. Instead, she was looking at the emissaries of Song. It was surprising that the leader of valor was willing to compromise. It was even more surprising that she had volunteered herself as the champion. Sonny was not sure what the rules of these duels were, but he suspected that Beastmaster could simply send one of her saints to fight, thus killing Anvil's only heir and securing the right to capture the Black Skull in one fell swoop. Was Morgan that desperate? Well, she had all the reasons to be. The forces of Song had already been more powerful than her own, considering the sea of nightmare creatures ruled by Beastmaster. With the addition of 6 transcendent reflections, it was as if Song now possessed 9 saints as opposed to Valor's 3. Was that why she had not only accepted the duel, but also tried to make it seem more alluring to the enemy by volunteering herself as a sacrificial offering? Sonny suddenly felt his heart grow cold. But if she did, then, following the same logic, wouldn't it mean that Beastmaster had no reason to accept the duel? Wake of Ruin let out a small, almost unnoticeable sigh of relief and turned to the emissaries of Song. Morgan of Valor has agreed to be the champion in the honorable duel. Who will your champion be, daughters of Song? Curse it all! Beastmaster remained silent for a few long moments, looking at Morgan with a soft smile. She seemed to be contemplating something. Then she answered simply, No. That short word sounded like the horn of the apocalypse to Sonny. Wake of Ruin froze. What do you? Beastmaster took a step forward, the same soft smile illuminating her stunningly beautiful face. I said no. There will be no duel. There will be no compromise. There will be no foresight and restraint, no more deals, no more alliances. Only bloodshed, only war. How does that sound, Morgan? Doesn't it sound nice? She might have considered a duel if her side was not overwhelmingly stronger. But with the 6 transcendent reflections Mordred had somehow nurtured, the scales of power between valor and song had become tilted too much in favor of song. In the end, it was those reflections that made the compromise impossible. Sunny's eyes widened. That bastard! Wake of Ruin hesitated. Don't be unreasonable. However, he was interrupted by Morgan herself. Enough. Her face was pale, but her vermilion eyes burned with sharp, piercing fury. You want war, Worms? Good, I like it. I'll show you war. Just like that, and perhaps just as expected, the last opportunity to avoid disaster slipped away from their grasp. Saint Cor desperately tried to salvage the situation, but it was hopeless. The armies of both clans were fully prepared to annihilate the enemy, and perhaps be annihilated themselves, on that cold November day. Their bloodlust could not be quenched with words. The fates of countless civilians were about to be decided on a battlefield where humans would be killing other humans, not the nightmare creatures. No, there would be nightmare creatures too. A sea of abominations would be killing humans on the orders of a saint. Somehow, that fact made the whole situation even sadder. The gods and the demons had fought side by side against the unknown too, but in the end they slaughtered each other. The battle did not start immediately. Sunny half expected the emissaries to lunge forward without wasting even a single second, but after exchanging murderous gazes, they simply turned around to return to their soldiers. The cold sky was full of heavy clouds, plunging the world into gray twilight. The leaders of the 2 armies were leaving to prepare for battle. Mordred stared at the backs of Morgan and Maddox for a few moments, then threw a quick glance at Sunny and smiled. With that he left with Sation, and his reflections followed. Wake of Ruin was motionless, looking at the ground. Somehow he looked older than usual. A heavy sigh escaped from the saint's lips. Ah, the world is changing too quickly, or is it me who can't keep up anymore? He lingered for a few moments, then looked at the ascendant of the evacuation army with a heavy gaze. Wake of Ruin hesitated, as if wanting to say something, but then simply shook his head. Withdraw. The ascendant shifted, preparing to follow his command. But Sunny didn't. Instead, he grimaced and took a step away, in the direction where the emissaries of valor were walking. Noticing his movement, Saint Cor frowned. What do you think you're doing, young man? Sunny stopped and looked at him calmly. What am I doing? I'm doing my best to make sure that as many people as possible are evacuated safely. That's the mission I signed up for when I joined the 1st Evacuation Army. What are you doing? The old saint stared at him incredulously. Then, sparks of dark anger ignited in his eyes. Standing under the wrathful gaze of a saint was nothing short of suffocating. Don't question my determination, Major Sunless. The government has never broken its neutrality. That is the only way to sustain this world. That is how we prevent it from being destroyed and how we save lives. Sunny truly respected Wake of Ruin. No matter how unpleasant the government transcendent was, he had nothing but admiration for the old man. However, he was fed up with empty words. Glaring at Saint Cor without looking away, Sunny gritted his teeth. Tell that to the millions of people who died in Falcon Scott. Tell that to the families of the soldiers who died under my command. Go tell the people who are going to die because we did nothing today that their lives were sacrificed for the sake of your damned neutrality. Better yet, go to the outskirts and explain to the people there how the government is sustaining them. Or don't, to be honest, I don't care. I'm still going to fight. Wake of Ruin grimaced. "You foolish brat, don't be blinded by short-term benefits. We can get involved today, but what will happen tomorrow? What will happen a year from today, 10 years? Stand down." The saint was seriously angry. For a moment, Sonny even felt as if his life was in danger. But then, suddenly, Jet calmly walked away from the government ascended and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. St. Cor scowled. "Reaper, what the hell are you?" Jet shook her head. "Calm down, old man. Sonny is right. We can't compromise and bide our time anymore. You said it yourself, the world is changing. Old tactics won't work. Going forward, there won't be any easy decisions." Before he could answer, she looked at Sonny and added, "And you, watch your tone. The old man is right, too. If the government decides to start openly choosing sides, there won't be a government in a few months. Can you imagine what will happen next?" Sonny blinked, while St. Cor pierced her with a cold look. "You say these things, but you're standing by his side. Am I missing something?" Jet shrugged and grinned. "Well, it would be scandalous if the legendary Wake of Ruin fought under the banner of clan valor, but a couple of renegade masters. No one will bat an eye. The government must stay neutral, but that doesn't mean that I have to. I am my own person after all, or have you forgotten that fact?" Her voice was calm and friendly, but the last words sounded cold. It was as if the temperature of the air around them dropped by a couple degrees. St. Cor shook his head. "Don't do anything stupid, Jet." But she simply stared at him silently for a few moments, unmoved. Eventually, Wake of Ruin grimaced and turned away. He didn't say anything more either. But somehow, it felt as though their silence conveyed too much meaning. As the old saint walked away, Kai and Effie looked at Sonny with tense expressions. He could understand a lot from their eyes as well. It was as though the three of them were having a silent conversation. But in the end, Sonny just shook his head. He knew what his friends wanted to do. They were willing to join him, not for any poignant reason, but simply because he was their friend. Nephi's and Cassie were too. But considering how things went, many people could die today. Someone had to stay alive to pick up the pieces. So he silently sent them away. Maybe it was a bit hypocritical of him to refuse their help, after proclaiming that he would do anything in his power to save as many people as possible. But Effie and Kai were people too. He wanted to save them as well. So they left with St. Cor. Sonny and Jet, meanwhile, hurried to catch up with the retreating emissaries of valor. When they did, he suddenly felt cold and confused. Sonny had decided to help one of the sides achieve as clean of a victory as possible. But with how things had turned out, was it even possible for valor to win? From the looks of it, it was Song who held an overwhelming advantage. If anything, he should be helping them. Full of uneasy thoughts, Sonny stole a glance at Morgan. She must have understood how desperate her army's situation was as well. He had expected to see a grim expression on her face, fear, even. But to his surprise, Morgan was walking while hiding a satisfied smile. Sonny's eyes narrowed slightly. What the hell is she smiling about? They returned to the army of the great clan Valor. The rows of squires were standing under the dull sky, with dozens of knights placed loosely throughout the formation. Most of them wore suits of masterfully crafted plate armor, some holding shields. Surprisingly, very few had already summoned their weapons, as if waiting for something. Looking at the hundreds of awakened who were calmly preparing for battle, Sonny couldn't help but feel a strange incongruity. This was not the largest military force he had seen, by far. During the Antarctica campaign, Sonny had witnessed great masses of human warriors clash with boundless hordes of abominations. Tens or thousands of soldiers and scores of hulking MWPs, supported by numerous turrets, artillery vehicles, and thunderous rail guns that rained fire on the enemy. The armies of the two great clans were modest in comparison. There were maybe 2,000 awakened gathered on the gloomy plain, with a scattering of echoes supporting them. There was the dark river of nightmare creatures enthralled by Beastmaster, as well, but overall, it all seemed strangely insignificant in scope and scale. However, he couldn't shake off the feeling that the small number of warriors in front of him were much more dire of a force than any he had seen before. And then there were the Saints. Whispering Blade, Sky Tide, Summer Night, Beastmaster, Silent Stalker, Dire Fang. Mordred's Reflections, Morgan's Echoes. There were Sunny and Nephi's as well. This is going to be a massacre. Sunny was not a member of Clan Valor, and as such, he was not familiar with the nuances of their training. Not really knowing where to place himself, he simply walked over to where Nephi's and Cassie were standing. Jet followed, summoning an unfamiliar glaive. Coincidentally, that placed them near Morgan as well. The Princess of War gave them a curious look. Master Sunless, Master Jet, what a nice surprise to see you here. Have you decided to keep us company today? She briefly glanced at Nephi's and smiled. Sunny lingered for a bit, then shrugged. Yes, we have our reasons. Jet was more direct. Looking at Morgan with a carefree expression, she nodded. Indeed, someone has to keep you bastards alive so that you could keep everyone else alive. Morgan stared at her for a few moments, then suddenly laughed. Well said. With that, she seemed to have lost interest in the two of them. A hurricane of white sparks suddenly rose around her, and one after another, echoes started to manifest themselves on the barren soil of East Antarctica. Sunny recognized some of them, but some he saw for the first time. All in all, there were 20 transcendent creatures under Morgan's control, including the familiar tortoise with a stone fort on its carapace. This time, it seemed, the towering creature was not going to be used as a mobile command center. Instead, awakened armed with bows and possessing sorcerous aspects climbed into the fort, turning the Echo into a walking siege tower. Not too long ago, Sunny had been stunned by the sight of Morgan's transcendent echoes. However, now that he had seen Mordred's reflections, they did not seem so domineering anymore. More than that, the daughters of Kai Song had to possess a few powerful echoes of their own, without a doubt. They had an overwhelming advantage in this battle, both in terms of low-level combatants and dreadful powerhouses. Song was far ahead of Valor. The only disadvantage they had was that Beastmaster, despite her diabolical power, was no match for Whispering Blade in a direct confrontation. Was that what Morgan was betting on? How was she planning to win? He hesitated for a few moments, then went ahead and asked. Not to sound presumptuous, Lady Morgan, but isn't our situation a bit too hopeless? She glanced at him, then smiled darkly. Her vermilion eyes seemed to shine in the gloomy twilight of the cloudy day. Hopeless? Ah, on the contrary, Master Sunless. The situation can be said to be in our favor. Morgan looked in the direction where the forces of Song were making their final preparations, and shook her head. Were you that impressed by the little trick that person pulled? Don't be. Those reflections of his are not as dangerous as they might seem. You see, human saints can be considered transcendent beasts, but they are so much more than that by virtue of being human. Those mirror creatures, however, are just that, creatures, and as such, they are bound by the same limitations. Her expression grew cold as she continued. In other words, while the reflections can copy the appearance, attributes, and even aspect abilities of a saint, they can't copy that which makes humans unique among beasts. Most importantly of all, they can only possess the same level of intelligence as a beast creature would. Have you noticed how they seem to repeat everything that he did? That is because, while powerful, they are nearly mindless at that stage. Unless controlled directly by their creator, these reflections can pose a serious threat, but not nearly as serious of a threat as actual saints would. Sunny looked at her with a frown. What Morgan said made sense. The reflections could copy the powers of a saint, but they could not become a saint. The mirror beast he had faced on the Reckoning Island was vastly different and much more dangerous because it was a devil. Its intelligence had not been inferior to that of a human. Still, 6 reflected saints, no matter how mindless, were incomparably more powerful than 6 transcendent beasts would have been, because they, too, possessed aspect powers of the humans they reflected. Noticing his doubt, Morgan smiled. "Don't be so concerned, Master Sunless. I was surprised by their appearance as well. Without the reflections, I'd say that our victory was all but assured. With them added to the board, well, I guess that each side has an equal chance to prevail. All that remains is to fight. Either we win or we lose. The outcome of the battle will be decided by nothing except the personal strength, skill, and resolve of those fighting." Ah, what a brilliant day! Morgan studied the distant army of song and inhaled deeply. Then her face grew slightly somber. "There are countless nuances to war, Master Sunless, but at its core, war is simple. All there is to it is power and application of power. The former is important, but the latter is more so. There is no point in being strong if one can't properly exert their strength after all. The daughters of Kai Song might think that they possess more power, but look at them. I have them exactly where I wanted them, even if the path to this moment was not what I expected it to be. Ah, but that is another thing. One has to be flexible when waging war. Rigid things are always the first to break." With a chill, Sunny realized that Morgan had been acting throughout the entire attempt at negotiations. She had never wanted the duel to happen. She had never wanted to avoid the battle instead. All she had wanted was to lure the enemy into committing to it. In the end, it was Beastmaster who insisted on proceeding with the battle, thinking that she had forced Morgan into a corner. He shook his head in amazement. Why is everyone in that family so devious? Well, it was not like he had anything to complain about. Morgan had said a lot of things, but conveniently failed to actually answer his question and explain what exactly gave her the confidence to face the superior force of Clan Song on the battlefield. Still, her confidence was a good sign for him. Sunny let out a sigh. Now, all he had to decide was how far he was willing to go to ensure that valor achieved a sweeping victory. What was he willing to show, and what was he willing to hide? The unpleasant answer was rather simple. Sunny had no right to hide anything. He had to give it his all unless he wanted to make every decision he had made thus far meaningless, even if abandoning his pretenses might end up putting him in danger. It was time to go all out. Morgan, meanwhile, turned to her soldiers and smiled. Her voice echoed across the plain, sounding as sharp as a sword leaving its scabbard. "Warriors of valor, today we sanctify this field with blood. Have no fear, have no mercy, have no doubt." The 1,000 awakened roared, and as they did, Morgan coldly looked at the knights among them and gave a small nod. In the next moment, something strange happened. Sharp steel flashed, and a dozen dead bodies fell to the ground, awash in blood. It happened so fast that no one even had a chance to react. Morgan shook her head slightly and said with contempt, "Did she really think that I wouldn't find her thralls?" Then she looked at the frozen soldiers with murderous determination, unsheathed her strange sword, and yelled, "The traitors are dead. Be strong, be sharp, be my sword." And as she did, the dim twilight was suddenly illuminated by a myriad of scarlet sparks. A hurricane of them, much larger than the one produced by manifesting echoes, surrounded Morgan like a river of blood. From that river hundreds of swords slowly appeared, hovering above ground. All of them were memories, and of considerable power at that. No sword was the same as the rest, each possessing a unique form, shape, and presence. And there was something strange about these swords, too, just like there was about the one she was holding in her hand. Sunny stared at the cloud of swords, stunned, until he noticed a common detail that all of them shared. Each had a symbol of an anvil pierced through by a sword either etched on its blade or engraved on its pommel. All of those are forged memories. Sonny watched as countless swords suddenly flew in different directions, each landing in the hand of an awakened warrior. And as he did, he felt that he knew what these swords were and who had created them. Anvil of Valor, the King of Swords. These swords had to be a conduit of his domain, or at least a manifestation of his aspect ability. Nephi's received a silvery longsword, and Cassie received a slender rapier. Sonny and Jet, though, did not receive anything, which was, honestly, a relief. While the two of them were observing the grandiose bestowal of swords with guarded expressions, Morgan turned to them and smiled. "Master Sunless, Master Jet, if there are any preparations you want to make, I suggest that you make them now. We are about to begin." Jet silently leaned on her glaive, showing that she was already as prepared as she wanted to be. Sonny, on the other hand, did have a few things to do. With a sigh, he called upon several memories: the Sin of Solace, the Dying Wish, the Shadow Lantern, and Morgan's warbow. When scarlet sparks swarmed around his hand, Morgan tilted her head slightly, as if surprised. When the black bow manifested itself, however, one of her eyebrows shot up. The princess gave him a strange look. "That is a curious bow you have there, Master Sunless." Sonny glanced at it and smiled. "Ah, yes, I might have forgotten to mention, but you sort of stole my heart once, Lady Morgan. It was a truly memorable day. Well, at least for me." The expression on her face was hard to describe, but it became even more incredulous when Sonny threw the bow into the air. "Wait, you are—" A moment later, a hand in a black armored gauntlet suddenly rose from his shadow and grabbed it. Two crimson flames ignited in the darkness, and then a towering figure in a fearsome suit of onyx armor stepped from the shadow, her silhouette both graceful and frightening. Saint remained motionless, observing the distant army of the great clan Song with utter indifference. Then a demonic black steed rose from the shadows, wreathed in darkness. Nightmare lowered his head, light reflecting on his adamantine horns. Lastly, a small fiendish creature made entirely of black steel appeared, staring at the horde of enthralled nightmare creatures with unmistakable hunger. Shadows moved, flowing onto Sonny's body. As they did, the light of day suddenly seemed darker and less substantial around them. He placed the Sin of Solace on his shoulder and looked at Morgan. "Now I'm ready." There were a lot of startled glances directed at Sonny. Of course, it couldn't be helped, even though he was a master, thus receiving a certain amount of respect and veneration from all awakened. The warriors of a great clan still tended to treat government soldiers with a bit of disdain. Watching a mere government envoy, no matter how distinguished, pull out two transcendent devils and a terror out of nowhere must have been a bit of a shock for them, especially because of how unlike the retainers of valor Sonny looked. He was neither tall nor physically imposing, and in fact appeared more slender than athletic. In addition, while pretty much everyone around him was clad in a suit of heavy plate armor, he wore only a light tunic and a pair of dainty silk shoes. It was almost as if Sonny was not taking the situation seriously, or was powerful enough to be able to disregard the protection of durable armor, despite the dire danger of the situation. There was one intangible quality, though, that convinced the warriors of valor that it was the latter rather than the former: presence. It was not a secret that saints possessed a certain presence about them, and the most powerful of masters did too. Like Jet, who emanated an illusory aura of cold, or Nephi's, who sometimes seemed to illuminate the space around her. Presence was often hard to describe, but it was unmistakable, and the feeling Sonny gave off when he got serious was of the dark, cold, and deeply frightening variety. Like staring into the eyes of your killer, or maybe even of death itself. So the warriors of valor were more than a little surprised. Obviously, Morgan was surprised the most. She stared at Sunny for a few long moments with a somewhat comical expression, then slowly shook her head and turned away. "You are a man who is full of surprises, Master Sunless. This is a good thing. We might need to pull off a miracle or two today in order to survive." No matter how amused and curious she was, now was not the time to engage in these kinds of emotions. The battle was about to start. In fact, it was already starting. The government forces had withdrawn, but remained at a distance to observe the clash. The two armies were moving now. On the side of Song, a tide of nightmare creatures surged forward and, shielded by it, the awakened followed. Sunny could not see the reflections and the saints, but he knew that they were out there somewhere, ready to strike. On the side of valor, the mounted warriors shook the ground as they moved forward, gaining speed for a devastating charge. The phalanx of Awakened marched forward behind them in perfect synchronicity, their formation like a wall of steel. Whispering blades suddenly seemed to disappear. Saint Tyrus rose into the air, assuming the form of the steel-winged thunderbird. The wind roared as she flew forward, and lightning danced around her body. Summer Night was at the tip of the wedge formation of the charging cavalry, his lance shining with resplendent light. Saint was galloping atop Nightmare side by side with him, drawing her bow with calm grace. Gods! Sunny was pulled forward as well, following Nephi's and Morgan. Jet and Cassie were near them, both with grim expressions on their faces. Only Imp seemed unaffected by the dreadful scale and meaning of the scene in front of them, scurrying forward with a wicked grin. "We are really doing it, aren't we?" As soon as he thought it, the world shook. Not too far ahead, a cloud of arrows rose from the ranks of Song's Awakened, followed by a swarm of winged abominations. All of them shot toward Sky Tide, aiming to intercept her. At the same time, the charging cavalry clashed with the sea of nightmare creatures. Just as it did, a swift black silhouette suddenly emerged from the mass of them and descended on Sir Gilead. In a flash of claws of crimson eyes, Sunny made out the figure of a giant, monstrous panther that had swiped at the Saint's Echo mount with her claws. Silent Stalker had finally shown her transformation ability. Then there was only chaos. A battle between Awakened could not be controlled, simply because of the nature of the people participating in it. Each of the soldiers possessed unique abilities and skills derived from them. No general, no matter how talented, could truly calculate and effectively guide such a great number of unpredictable variables. It was as though 2,000 devils were unleashed onto the desolate plain, burning with the murderous desire to destroy each other. All that the leaders of the two armies could do was set certain tactics in motion and hope for the best. And fight. In the War of Awakened, the personal valor of the combatants was much more important than in a battle of mundane soldiers, or even in one against nightmare creatures. Which meant that a single individual's contribution could also exert great influence on the outcome. This was what Sunny hoped for at least. However, watching Valor Cavalry collide with Beastmaster's thralls, he was suddenly not sure if anything he could do would make a difference. Of course it can. There aren't that many masters here, and among them, only Nephi's and Mordred can be compared to me. With my shadows, I am almost as valuable as a saint, so I need to throw these doubts away and fight. As the havoc of the bloody melee drew nearer, threatening to swallow the battle formation of valor, Sunny suddenly heard the exhilarated voice of the Sin of Solace laughing in his ear. "Fight, fight, fight. All you ever do is fight, but what have you achieved? Nothing. You failed your soldiers, you failed the people you wanted to protect, and on top of that, you even ended up in the exact place that you had wanted to escape. Pitiful fool. Do you really think that today will be any different?" Sunny could even see a shadowy figure following him. its features more distinct and pronounced than ever. He smiled crookedly. "Ah, it's you. You're just in time. Come on, bastard, watch me." Then there was no more time for idle thoughts. The cavalry had cut through the river of thralls and drowned in the ranks of songs awakened. The tide of abominations, meanwhile, was already mere meters away. Gritting his teeth, Sonny brandished the jade sword and called upon the shadows. The battle formation of Clan Valor was steadily advancing while keeping its shape, but Sonny was a poor fit for their polished tactics. Someone needed to break the momentum of the horde of the Beastmaster's thralls anyway. There was a sea of them, ranging from pitiful dormant vermin to frightening corrupted behemoths. The charge of the cavalry had destroyed some, but countless more remained. Looking at the surging mass of abominations, Sonny couldn't help but feel a shiver run down his spine. Beastmaster, her power was truly great and terrible. But then he could be terrible himself. As Sonny unleashed the shadows contained within his divine lantern, a tide of darkness suddenly spread from his feet, reaching into the attacking horde. A moment later, it came alive. Kill! Sonny had come a long way in his mastery of shadow manifestation. From swiping a piece of trash from his kitchen table to binding a titan and beyond, he had never stopped improving. And now, it was time to make use of all those lessons for one single purpose: maximum devastation. The darkness came alive, and countless inky black hands suddenly rose from it. They grabbed the lunging abominations, tearing their flesh with long obsidian claws. A wide swath of the horde was instantly turned into a harrowing hellscape of moving shadows, spilling blood and mutilated bodies. There was a cacophony of piercing shrieks and howls, too, all of them full of chilling agony. Sonny paid no attention to the reactions of the warriors of valor. His mind was in a state of battle clarity and augmented by the shroud of dusk on top of that. But still, it took every bit of his mental ability to control that many manifested shadows. He felt as though his brain was going to explode. But as a result, the destruction he had perpetrated was on such a large scale that it almost seemed like the work of some profane deity. He only maintained it for a few short seconds, not wishing to burn too much essence, but that was more than enough. The center of the horde was utterly broken, its momentum spent. Somewhere to his left, a blinding flash suddenly illuminated the world, and another chunk of the thralls was swallowed by furious white flames. As soon as the darkness dissipated and the white flames dissolved, the vanguard of the Valor force, Sonny, Nephi's, Morgan, and Jet, were already upon the enthralled monsters. Nephi's was clad in an intricate black armor, with soft white radiance spilling from its seams. Her longsword, however, shone the brightest, cutting through the nightmare creatures like a ray of incinerating starlight. She moved with the stunning speed and ruthless elegance of a heaven-born killer. Jet was almost as deadly, although her battle style seemed much less refined. It was all about efficiency, practicality, and butchery. Even though her strikes left no marks on the bodies of her victims, the kills somehow looked more savage. Morgan, meanwhile, was like a hurricane of steel. Everything around her was cut and sliced to pieces, as if she was surrounded by a shifting field of some invisible severing force. However, there was no force. There was only Morgan herself, her body, and her sword. She was like a streak of black and vermilion, leaving misty crimson clouds in her wake. And then there was Sonny himself. This early into the battle, he was conserving his essence, so there was nothing flashy about how he fought. It was best described by the word elusive. He danced between the abominations like a shadow, easily evading the deluge of attacks and sometimes delivering swift strikes of his own. Although these strikes did not seem too powerful and only left behind small wounds, they somehow never failed to bring the creatures down. Just a few moments after the four of them dove into the horde of thralls, the battle formation of Clan Valor finally connected with the enemy. Swords rose and fell. Arrows flew. Hundreds of aspect abilities activated in unthinkable harmony. Blood spilled on the ground. Sunny was startled. What the hell is this? There was a limit to training and being familiar with the powers of your comrades. Sunny knew it better than most, since he had been a part of an awakened cohort before, and even led one for a period of time. He had been in command of large military forces, too. So Sunny understood very well just how important synergy and synchronicity really were. Only when the cooperation between the members of a cohort reached the level where they could move as a single whole, without the need for words, would the cohort have a chance to survive. However, cohorts were usually small for a good reason. With how different and unpredictable aspect powers were, it was nearly impossible to bring them together in harmony, and the more awakened there were, the more difficult that task was. The difficulty grew exponentially. What the Army of Valor showed, however, was a level of unity that went beyond reason. It was not exactly perfect, but close enough to perfection to be startling. Their battle formation seemed less like hundreds of warriors fighting side by side, and more like a single being with 1,000 arms and 1,000 heads. Like a perfectly crafted war machine. It was honestly a bit frightening. Damn! Carving a bloody path through the thralls, Sunny couldn't help but pay attention to the battle formation of Clan Valor. It steadily advanced, withstanding the pressure of the horde of nightmare creatures like a moving fortress of steel. Countless abominations were dying beneath the sharp swords of the awakened warriors, and when an especially powerful creature attacked, one of the knights would step forward to face it. Arrows rained without stop. The giant tortoise was marching behind the formation, serving as a mobile fort, but even its presence could not explain how the archers were so effective in slaying the enemies without ever putting their allies in danger. It's the swords. Sunny did not have any reason to come to that conclusion, but he felt that he was right. This incredible, almost unnatural level of unity between the hundreds of awakened warriors of the great clan Valor had to have something to do with the swords forged and bestowed on them by their sovereign. No wonder Clan Valor is famed for its battle prowess. Just how deadly would perfect cooperation be in a war? Sunny quickly adjusted his understanding of the battle, accounting for the new variable. The boon of the forged swords was, without a doubt, a powerful advantage, much more powerful than one would think. But would that boon alone be enough to turn the tide of the battle? Somehow it didn't seem like it. No matter how Sunny looked at it, the position of Valor was still incredibly weak. What is Morgan thinking? It seemed as if the world was ending. Even more than during the battle against the Titanic Horde or in Falcon Scott, it seemed like the world was breaking apart. There had been clashes of similar scale in Antarctica, but at least there was some logic and structure to them. The thunderous roars of the railguns, the orderly formations of mundane soldiers, the power of the awakened, the demented fury of the nightmare creatures. No matter how frenzied a battle was, there was a distinction between the clashing sides at least. Today it was just chaos. Thousands of aspects tearing the ground and the sky apart. Awakened, masters, echoes, and enthralled nightmare creatures intertwined in murderous violence. Even the saints were fighting each other, making the world shake with each strike. Somewhere not too far away, Silent Stalker was entangled with Sir Gilead. The monstrous Black Panther had long ago ripped Summer Knight's mount apart with her claws, and was now trying to extinguish the valiant saint himself. It was not that easy to do, because he had transformed as well. Where a handsome knight in resplendent armor had been, there was now an ethereal figure that seemed to be made of pure sunlight. The figure was human-like and of the same height as Sir Gilead, but every time Silent Stalker struck at it, her claws simply passed through the light, not leaving any wounds on Summer Knight's shining body. When he lashed out with his sword, however, Deep wounds were left on the panther's sable hide. Silent Stalker did not seem to pay them any attention. As they continued to fight, the radiance of the luminous figure was slowly growing bleaker. On another spot of the battlefield, the ground trembled as a giant thunderbird fell from the skis. Sky Tide had withstood the rain of arrows and slaughtered the swarm of winged thralls, but then it was as if a wall of invisible force crashed into her. St. Tyrus rolled on the ground, unable to sustain her transformation anymore, and knelt while grabbing her head. Her beautiful face was pale, and there was a dazed look in her eyes. She glanced at the distant formation of Clan Song, where Beastmaster was hidden, concentrating her incredible power to deliver a terrible mental attack. Then, still kneeling, Sky Tide outstretched her hand and summoned her sword. As she slowly rose to her feet, swaying, a rush of nightmare creatures and enemy ascended was already closing in on her. Somewhere else, 4 reflections were entangled in a strange fight with the wind. The lightning-wreathed Thunderbird, a creature that looked like a towering hybrid between a wolf and a human, and a devilishly beautiful woman were launching one attack after another against an invisible opponent. There was a 4th mirror creature as well, but it was as unseen as their adversary. Whispering Blade alone was pushing back the reflections of Sky Tide, Dire Fang, Beastmaster, and himself. It was impossible to say which side was winning, since the mirror creatures did not express any emotions, and Madoc himself could not be seen. However, their clash was far from reaching a conclusion. Some distance away, Saint was fighting against the reflection of Summer Night. She had sent Nightmare away and stood alone against the radiant warrior made of sunlight, her black sword clashing against his shining blade with murderous intent. 2 knights, one ominous and wreathed in darkness, the other resplendent and suffused with warm radiance, were like night and day, and their furious clash instilled fear into the hearts of anyone who witnessed it. Nightmare, meanwhile, had attacked the awakened warriors of Song, but was thwarted by the reflection of Silent Stalker. The black steed was almost caught in the maw of the giant panther, but then a scrawny figure of dark metal suddenly leaped on the mirror creature's back, grabbing onto it with sharp claws and sinking his irresistible teeth into the beast's hide. The 3 of them turned into a whirlwind of darkness, demolishing anything that got in their way. The battle formation of Clan Valor had cut through the horde of thralls and collided with the awakened of Song. Despite their unnatural unity, it was impossible to maintain the phalanx after that. Soon, the battle inevitably descended into utter mayhem. Awakened fought against awakened, and masters fought against masters. Here and there, some managed to stay close to their cohort, while others were completely isolated and faced the enemy alone. Humans and echoes were thrown together into a disorderly mess of dreadful violence and chilling cruelty. Despite the fact that the warriors of valor wielded swords forged by anvil, which made them far more dangerous than they would have ordinarily been, they were still severely outnumbered. There were plenty of enthralled abominations left on the battlefield after all. Clan Valor was holding well for now, but Sunny couldn't see how they could win. In fact, the only reason for the strained equilibrium on the battlefield was Sky Tide. There was no effective counter against her powers among the high-ranking warriors of Clan Song, and so Beastmaster had to concentrate her fearsome mental attacks on only one person. Now that St. Tyrus had been brought down, however, the Enchantress would be free to wreak havoc among the rest of Clan Valor's forces soon. Once that happened, the situation would very likely cascade into a disaster with terrible speed. Apart from Saint, who was immune to mental attacks and mind manipulation, every other combatant on the battlefield would be at risk. Perhaps even Beastmaster was not powerful enough to break the will of a transcendent instantly, but she did not need to either. Considering how dire the clashes between the transcendents were already, a moment of distraction would be enough to give the enemy a crucial opportunity to deal a fatal strike. She could turn her diabolical powers against the mass of awakened, as well, ensuring that the spine of Valor's army was broken, which meant that Beastmaster had to be stopped. But who could stop her? Every powerful combatant on the side of Valor was tied down. Only the masters were relatively free, or at least could extricate themselves from the melee with relative ease. However, among them, Sunny alone possessed the ability to bypass the mass of song warriors and attack the alluring saint. Problem was, he was not sure that he would be able to withstand her power. More than that, he simply did not know where she was. Beastmaster was not very strong in a physical clash, so she did not show herself freely. Cutting down an enemy ascended, Sunny jumped back and sucked in a hoarse breath. Damnation! Something had to change. It was growing near the moment Sunny feared. He did not really care if Valor won or lost. All he cared about was making sure that there were enough awakened left alive in the aftermath of the battle to continue defending the siege capitals across Antarctica until the winter solstice. But for that, he needed Clan Song to be defeated in a swift and decisive fashion, which didn't seem to be possible anymore. In fact, from what he saw, the most probable result of the battle was the one he had wanted to avoid at all costs: mutual destruction. The forces of Song were going to win, but the closer they came to victory, the more furiously the warriors of Valor would fight. In the end, it was going to be a massacre. Unless Morgan had something planned. But what could it be? Damn it, damn it. Sunny could think of only one way to quickly break the tide of the battle: eliminate Beastmaster. But the alluring saint was hidden from his sight, and so he couldn't even attempt to attack her. In the absence of the real target, there was a secondary goal he wanted to achieve. It was not something that his calculating mind had deemed the most beneficial in the current situation, but simply something he desired. Sunny did not want to see Saint Tyrus die. So he was intending to help her. Maybe that would force Beastmaster to keep suppressing Sky Tide without switching to other targets as well. Currently, Sunny was in the very thick of the furious melee between the two armies. There were swords flashing and blood spilling on all sides, the terrible cacophony of the battle assaulting his ears at the same time as the vile ugliness of it all assaulted his eyes. Numerous aspects were turning the somber Antarctic plain into a feverish nightmare, and the overcast sky was on the verge of unleashing a heavy rain. In front of him, an ascendant of Clan Song easily cut down a valiant awakened of Clan Valor. He had noticed her a long time ago as she moved across the battlefield, leaving a trail of blood and death in her wake. The woman's aspect seemed to do with manipulating blood. A stream of it spiraled around her like a scarlet ribbon, sometimes shooting forward to pierce the heavy armor of her enemies as if it was paper. Their eyes met for a moment, and then the Ascended lunged into an attack. Sunny was faster. He easily dodged the scarlet ribbon, dashed forward, and deflected her sword. A split second later, the blade of the Sin of Solace passed through the woman's neck. You have slain an ascended human. Waste. In the same motion, Sunny battered an abomination's claw to the side, thus saving the life of an awakened soldier, and grabbed the creature by the neck. It shattered in his grip, and before the pale soldier could react, he was already moving past. You have slain a fallen. Not a moment later, the awakened was killed by an enchanted arrow that slid into the visor of his helmet. Waste. There were the remains of a cohort of Song warriors trying to bar his way, 3 of them, all covered in blood and with wild looks on their faces. Shadows rose from the ground, grabbing at their ankles. The Sin of Solace flashed 3 times, and 3 heads rolled down. Such a damned waste. Sunny cut through the battlefield, moving with terrible speed. He killed anyone who could slow him and evaded everyone else. Nevertheless, the shadow he had sent forward was much faster. It reached St. Tyrus long before he could. Sunny used Shadow Step to appear near Sky Tide instantly, and not a moment too soon. She was completely surrounded by enemies, cutting them down with her sword. Even though Tyrus had been denied her transcendent form, and even though she was continuously withstanding a ruinous mental assault, she was still a saint. Her physical prowess, skill, and judgment were beyond the realm of ordinary humans. However, even she had a limit. Sunny deflected a sword aimed at her back and used the rebound force to spin and deliver a crushing kick to the abdomen of the attacking master. Usually, it would have been stupid to show his back to the enemy, but right now, they were surrounded from all sides. No matter how Sunny turned, he would be exposed. Additionally, such logic only applied to humans who did not have eyes at the back of their heads. He, however, had shadow sense, and could look upon the world through his shadows as well. Sunny did not have blind spots, and he also did not have common weaknesses. He could even fight with his eyes closed, if he wished to, while his skin was hard enough to resist most attacks below a certain level. Which didn't mean that he was invincible, of course. In fact, as soon as he reached St. Tyrus, he was overwhelmed by a sudden feeling of dread. Sunny did not know the reason for it, but it was as though something inconceivably vast and powerful was looking at him, full of inhuman indifference. No, not indifference, emptiness. What is this feeling? Sunny was distracted for a split second, which gave the enemies an opportunity to launch an attack on him. From below, the ground suddenly shifted and rose, wrapping around his legs, just like the shadows he had used a dozen seconds ago to immobilize the three awakened. At the same time, a javelin made of turbulent wind shot at his head. Sunny cursed, then sent essence into his legs to give them some explosive strength, broke through the bindings, and bent backwards to dodge the javelin. As a result, he avoided the attack, but ended up rolling over his shoulder. When he hit the ground, though, it felt wrong. What the hell? Sunny felt something cold and slithering move across his palm. Looking down, he saw a thin, gray worm crawling across it, with pieces of soil sticking to its translucent body. The sight of it was naturally disgusting, but more than that, it suddenly filled Sunny with fear. He gazed at the spot that he had touched to exit the roll and shivered. The soil was moving, countless worms crawling out of it like flesh maggots. It was not just that small patch of ground, either. All around them, the battlefield seemed to be rippling. The ground was seething like a liquid, full of these thin, gray worms. Suddenly, Sunny felt very cold. His mind froze for a brief moment. It could have been a manifestation of a powerful aspect ability, but the scale of it was too great to come from anyone except for a saint. There were no saints with these kinds of powers on the battlefield, though. His eyes widened. The Titan. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.